Anyways, so yeah, Sad Boys Book Club. Gotta love
Yes.
keeping that very esoteric name going.
Yep. The inaugural episode of the Sad Boys Book Club.
Yep. House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski? Is that how you say it?
I think that's right.
You're a Daniel, so I assume you speak Danielistics. I don't know.
I may be a Daniel, but I'm not Polish. Which I assume he is. I don't know. The Luski is kind of a Polish thing.
Like I don't know names. I don't know cultures because I'm white, so therefore I'm uncultured. So I looked at that name and my first thought was that's a fake name.
Well,
He just got a Jewish name and Daniel and put it together.
well, the name Daniel is a Hebrew name, actually.
You know what? Fair
It's one
point.
of those. But anyway, let's see. House of Leaves. All right. So what? How would you like to get this started here?
It's a book. That is absolute fact. It is a book.
That's true. Of all the things that we will talk about, I'm sure we'll get many things wrong, miss a lot of stuff, but you cannot fault us here when we identify this as a book.
I knew the reputation surrounding this before going into it. Like I've heard of this book many times. I've heard people talk about it. And all I
Mm-hmm.
really knew about it was that it was a weird book. I've heard people say that it's like the format and like the concept is the most interesting thing about it, not necessarily the plot itself. It's kind of like one of those things
Mm-hmm.
where it's the not necessarily like all sizzle no steak kind of thing, the all style no substance. Not necessarily that, but
Mm-hmm.
more so it's known for its style, not its substance. That's what I knew going into it.
Yeah, I'm going to out myself as a long time on and off redditor. I know this. That's how I first heard about it. It was people talked about it a lot. Like I don't know what was like 8 years ago, somewhere in there. And I know the book came out around. Here, let me flip. I got the book right here with me.
Yes, the remastered full
Okay,
color
the cop.
edition.
Yeah, yeah. For reference, we're looking at the remastered full color edition here. Okay, so it looks like it came out in 2000,
That was its original
which
publication.
I think the original publication, and this might be something worth looking into later. I think it kind of circled around certain like like literary and art circles in the Los Angeles area for a while, but I think it was like it had its full publication, which I think is this remastered full color edition that was we're referring to. I think it was 2000 that happened.
Oh, I didn't actually look at the what's it called the copyright information page the information
Mm-hmm.
page. Well, I don't know what you would call that page just in general. I didn't really look at that until just now because I wanted to look at that when you were talking about that. So yeah, I'm assuming
Mm-hmm.
its original like novelization publication um was 2000. But I'm looking at it and they even have like the Random House Inc. The house in that is also blue. And then I looked at the bottom
Mm-hmm.
here under the this is a work of fiction, blah 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 blah, and it
Mm-hmm.
has the color code ostensibly. The word house is in blue, Minotaur and
Mm-hmm.
all struck passages in red. The only struck line in chapter 21 appears in purple, and then a bunch of X's and color plates. Then there's like other things, two color, black and white, incomplete. No braille. Oh, I'm glad that's established. There's no braille, so sorry, blind people. This version is not for you.
It's not inclusive. But I think that would be an interesting concept. That would probably be difficult to work into, but I think that would be an interesting concept, including passages. I don't know. This book does a lot of interesting things that are, I guess, kind of. I guess it kind of gives. This is not. I'm definitely not the first postmodern novel in terms of content, but in terms of form, it's got to be pretty early on. I think it's kind of interesting in that it pioneers a lot of things, like you were saying, like different usages of colors of text, and it kind of plays with like the way that words appear on the page a little bit as you go on. I guess that might be a little bit of a spoiler, but I have tried to read this once before, and I was enjoying it. I fully enjoyed it, but I just for one reason or another, life got in the way, and I never got around to picking it back up. But there are some interesting things that it does with the way that words are displayed on a page, and the way you may have to in certain passages manipulate the book physically to sort of make sense of things. So it's kind of an interesting. It's really interesting from that standpoint.
I haven't gotten to anything like that yet, where with like the manipulating the book or anything. I'm aware that shit like that happens. Um,
Hmm.
like I said, my going into this, I was aware of like the kind of reputation. I didn't know anything about the plot. I didn't know if even there was a plot. And I still don't think I do, honestly. As far we're not far in the book, but as far as we are, I still don't know if there actually is a plot. Um,
Yes. For reference, we finished the first four chapters as of this recording,
it was supposed to
and
be 9, and we both pulled a me.
we it was both of our faults. I think I kind of took my eye off the ball on this one a little bit. I should have been reading a little bit more frequently than I should have, but I hope subsequently. I mean, we'll see how this goes, but I'd like to go back to the original idea of reading maybe larger chunks so we can, because otherwise I think there's a possibility that we get bogged down in this labyrinth, so to say.
Yeah, so the original idea was get to chapter 9, which is page 107, and we gave ourselves 2 weeks. Let's see, we started. Well, I don't know when you started the book. I started the book on the 18th. Today is the 28th of January 2023 to date this. I started the book on the 18th. Um,
Yeah, I think I started it. Yeah, sometime around then. Not too long after that.
yeah, which I'm using the term started very very loosely here. That was 10 days ago. So that was what, last Wednesday, and it was at like 1 a.m. I was
Mm.
sick. I was sick that week. That was horrible. So I was like, I might as well do something productive while I'm sick here. And I started reading the book, and I read the introduction written by our narrator, for lack of a better term, Johnny Truant. And I read through the
Yes.
the introduction and made it to the Navidson record, and that's where I stopped. And I didn't pick it up again until I want to say Monday, which would have
Hmm.
been the 23rd. I want to say. And my goal was, so I need to get to chapter 9, so let's try and average 2 chapters a night. So I read it Monday, or maybe it was Tuesday. I think it was Tuesday when I started reading it. I read 2 chapters on Tuesday. I read 2 chapters on Wednesday. I played Yakuza Kiwami on Thursday, and I did nothing on Friday. So, needless to say, when you texted me last night and you were like, I'm not as far, I'm not going to get anywhere close to where we got, I just had an absolute wave of relief because I'm like, oh, thank God I don't have to read 60 pages tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that'd be kind of tough. That's not to say I haven't enjoyed it. I've definitely enjoyed it. Definitely reading through it, but
Yeah, it's not so
I think
much.
trying to there's a difference between when you're just kind of reading for pleasure, like purely for pleasure, and then when you're kind of doing what we're doing, or what I'm doing at least, and I'm trying to take notes here, at least try to find relevant stuff. We'll see just how good of notes I took. I don't know how, when I was in when we were in school, I don't know that I really took very good you know how when you're reading books for classes, you have to take notes, you have to annotate your books and all that.
I
I
hated
was
that, by
never
the
really
way.
good at that.
They were like, oh, you gotta annotate your book, you gotta highlight, you gotta take your pen and write notes in the margins, and I'm like, fuck that. I don't want to deface. I respect books. Okay, books are like one of my favorite things in the world. Even though I have been a horrible reader for the last decade, I have finished. Let's see. I picked up a book for the first time since I think 2017 in 2021, and I finished two books in 2021, and I finished one book in 2022. So needless to say, I have not been an avid reader in the last decade, more or less. Um, but I love books. I was reading ever since I was a little kid. I read like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, and, all that fun stuff. But I fell off the horse when I became an adult because time and video games and hobbies and crippling depression and all these other things. That make you not want to do things you enjoy.
Certainly, certainly, and I think that's a pretty common experience.
Uh,
Going when someone goes to college or joins the adult world, however they do that, whether it's going directly into the workforce or whatever, they don't really make as much time to just read recreationally. And that's kind of something that I would like to like a personal goal of the Sad Boy Book Club would be to kind of rekindle, like you were saying, that like early love of reading that I had. Because
yeah,
I used to do that. I was the same. Were summer reading clubs. Just demolishing books at you know go check out books, go and then have them all read by the time I would go back for the to go ready to go turn them in.
yeah.
So that's something that I would like to do. Trying to kind of rebuild my reading stamina and attention span, and just kind of get back into reading as a whole.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it because that's what I've been trying to do for the last couple of years, and I've been bad. I've been really bad at it. Like in 2021, I finished the two books I actually read to completion were Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs, which were excellent books, by the way. Silence of the Lambs more so than Red Dragon, but not much. They're both great books. I highly recommend both. I got a Kindle. Yeah, I got a Kindle, and that's what I was using it for. I was like, I'll read Silence of the Lambs on the Kindle. Uh, those were great. I started Dune and didn't finish Dune. And I was like really trying to get through it before the movie came out, and I was mostly successful. I stopped at
I
the end of
think you
book
got through
one.
the part where roughly where the movie stopped.
There were like I got about 30 minutes before the end of the movie. I stopped at the end of book one of Dune book one. I hate how they do that. I always find that really confusing and when it's a series of books and then the book is separated into books. It's like, if it was called like part one, part two, part three, that'd be better. But he called it book one, book two, book three, and I'm like, this is a series of books, and you have book one inside of book one and book two inside of. Anyways, I'm getting on a tangent. I finished book one, which ends with um which ends with I don't remember the characters' names anymore. Paul and
All
his
Atreides,
yeah, Paul and his mom in the tent. They're like in the
Lady
tent.
Jessica.
Thank you. Yes. They're in the tent having their conversation, which most of that conversation was cut from the movie. I get it. I'm disappointed, but I get it. It did not make the movie worse, but it made my enjoyment of the movie worse, which is subjective. But I loved the movie. The movie was great. We saw it in IMAX. It was great, or Dolby, and it was great, and I loved it. The movie was great. But yeah, it was the final scene in the book that I read was they were in the tent talking, and that's when he has like his I almost said Turok Makto. That's Avatar. The moment where he has his I can see the future kind of thing, and that's where the first book ends in the first Dune book, and then the movie went another like 30 minutes past that up to where he like fights that dude in like one on
He
one combat,
he
which
joins the Fremen. Yeah, he joins the Fremen at the end of the movie.
yeah, he
I
meets
guess.
Zendaya, and they go off to. So the movie went a little further, but that's how far I got in Dune. This is not about Dune. So I also started the Eye of the World, and I only in 2021, and I only made it to page like 60 something like that. I don't know. I read the first prologue, I read the second prologue, and I got partway through chapter one, and that book is fantastic. I love it. 2022, I only read two books. I only finished one, and it was the one I finished was American Psycho, and that is like probably the only book I could ever say that I really enjoyed, and I will never recommend it. It is a tough
Yeah,
read.
it can be kind of a slog. I know it goes through very lengthy passages, describing, like
Clothing is the big one.
very dated fashion things in the restaurants, and basically the very detailed descriptions of like the stockbroker in the 1980s lifestyle.
Yeah, it's similar to reading Martin, but instead of him describing sex and food, it's describing clothing. And it's like I
Hmm.
get it, and like at first I was like, "This is funny, haha," and then by like page 200, I was just like, "This is less funny, haha." But it was a good book. I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it, but like it was like, okay, there's a lot of this book that's not great, and it's the point of it is supposed to be not great, and it's like just because you're intentionally making something bad doesn't make it good. But I respect that you did this intentionally, and the writing is really good, and the plot is really good, and Bateman is such a great character to follow. Like he's a horrible person, and like it's really fun when you get to those scenes in the movie, the scenes that they adapted into the movie, and you're reading it in the book, and they're damn near like 1 to 1. Like a lot of the dialogue is exactly the same. There's some dialogue that's added in the movie, some dialogue that's cut from the book. It's an adaptation, but you get those scenes
Hmm.
and you know exactly what you're in if you watch the movie first, like I imagine most people who read the book were who read the book after 2000. And you get those scenes and it's fantastic, and you're like, oh, this is great, I remember this from the movie, and you're reading it and you get that mental image and it's perfect. And then you get other scenes that are like specifically in the book, and they're like really funny at times. Some of them are like intense and insane and super macabre and like disturbing, and I'm like, what the fuck am I reading, why am I reading this? And then you have other ones that are just really funny, like I don't, going on tangents again. There's a great bit where him and oh god, what's her name? It's Reese Witherspoon's character, his fiance Evelyn. Evelyn. Patrick and
Hmm.
Evelyn they go on this like little mini vacation for like a couple of weeks to this one of his friends who I think Evelyn is having an affair with. They go to like his like beach house that's like I think it's still in New York, but it's out of the city. It's like out into the country, and like
Hmm.
they're on this like little mini vacation for like a couple of weeks, and there's a lot of times where he's like contemplating killing her, and he's like doing like these like really just kind of like manic things, and it's around the time where like if you remember in the movie there's the part where he's like I'm losing who I am, I'm starting to lose control, I don't know if I can contain this only at night, like it's starting to slip into my day life and all that.
Hmm.
it's
Yes.
it's it's around that part of the plot, and that's where it actually starts kind of happening, to where he's like I can't control this. So there's a lot of parts where he's like debating about killing her. There's like this isn't funny by any means what I'm about to say, but it's just kind of one of the things that happens. He buys her a dog, he gets annoyed with the dog, so then he kills the dog, and then I think he actually cooks and feeds her the dog, which gave me some great TV Maxwell flashbacks. While I was reading it.
Hmm.
But it's like it's this really weird thing that's only in the book, and I got a good little kick out of it. There's like great character moments that are only in the book, and it was a very fun book. But I can't recommend it because it's just so boring in other times, and it's intentionally boring, but that doesn't make it less boring. To round that off, though, that was the book I finished in 2022. The other one that I read in 2022 was I continued reading The Eye of the World, which, for context, I didn't say this earlier. It's the first book in the Wheel of Time series, and I just started somewhere in the 60s, and I think I'm now somewhere in the ballpark of like 200 something. So I read a lot. I read like almost a quarter of the book. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, maybe sometime we could, think about moving that, or mention Dune. I wouldn't mind thinking about moving Dune into this, but that's quite an undertaking, either one of those.
Yeah, doing a little less
But I
so.
think that's true. It's yeah, the it's pretty dense, but it's very well paced, where you can get through it.
Yeah.
If you lock in. But to kind of bring us back to where we're supposed to be, I think we should probably start with, I guess, what was your kind of initial impression of Johnny Truant as we kind of see him, in the introduction?
Oh yes, that's right. We're talking about House of Leaves here.
Hmm.
That's the whole point of this. That's why we're here. Uh, yeah. I'm not too sure how I feel about him yet. Like, are we trying to like stick this? Because there's a lot of things I could say about him, but are we trying to stick this purely to the introduction or just him in general?
I guess I guess we could talk about just the introduction as a whole, if you'd
Okay.
like. We could just kind of like, cause you get it, and it's already from the very beginning. It's you feel it feels very it really grabs you. You like you get there's a very strong. He does a very good job. Danielewski does a very good job of like already like there's like a lot of tension and like desperation. You get like a very strong sense of like the desperation that we find Johnny Truant in. You know, it starts with I still get nightmares. In fact, I get them so often I should be used to them by now. I'm not. No one ever really gets used to nightmares. For a while, I tried every pill imaginable, trying anything to curb the fear. And then he goes through like all these kind of medicines, like
Mm-hmm.
Excedrin PM, melatonin, L-tryptophan, and then he kind of like it kind of like you kind of see he's escalating like like over the counter kind of stuff, and then he's going into like quite a few members of the barbital family. So he's kind of you really see that he's kind of like a man at the end of his rope, trying to find like some sort of self medication for the this state that he's in where he can't sleep restfully anymore. He's getting these nightmares. I don't know. I think they do a really good job of that's something that you really get a lot of here. Is there? It's a good introduction to the character. You see like the desperation, so you get all that at the beginning. Um, he's talking about how he can't sleep very well, and then you kind of meet some of the early characters that kind of are important in his. I guess should we say that he hits? There's two stories here. There's
Yeah.
kind of the story that Zampano is recounting in the Davidson record, and the Johnny Truant. I guess Johnny Truant is kind of the. I guess he's the main protagonist in a sense because we're the way he is our kind of vantage point into this story.
Yeah. So
Um,
like I feel like yeah, like you said, there's like the two stories. There's the I would say it's like the House of Leaves proper, which is by Zampano. I hope I'm saying that
I
right.
think I think it's got the accent mark slanting down. So wouldn't it be Zampano?
You know more than me, I'm sure. Zampano is that?
I think so. I think it's closer to that.
So
But
we've got
we'll figure that out. We'll do a little research.
yeah yeah. Once again, I'm white. I have no culture, so I'm bad at these things. So we have like the House of Leaves proper by Zampano, and then we have like the B storyline, which is Johnny Truant, like for lack of a better term, kind of like reacting to the House of Leaves, to like having his little commentary. It's almost like oh, what's a good little comparison to have here? I mean, he's like the narrator, for lack of a better term, but he's like an
Mm-hmm.
interjecting narrator that, like, we can go into this in a little bit, but he has his like huge tirades that he goes on in the footnotes that can take pages and pages of just has nothing to do with anything, but it's just like we'll go more into that later. But like, yeah, so he's ostensibly just kind of like an interjector who's like trying to. It's almost like hostile, for lack of a better term, like how Johnny is in the story, because it's almost like it's like you're watching a movie with a friend, and that friend is trying to have a conversation with you while you're watching the movie, and you want to watch the movie, but you want to listen to your friend at the same time, so you have this conflicting thing that's happening, and I think that's what Johnny's role is, to almost be not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
a spoiler, but like not a distractor, but like to loop back to the introduction. Yeah, it's cautionary for sure. It's the oh, I fell into this hole, and now I'm in a hotel. There's blood on me, and not all of it's mine. Turn back now. Don't read this book like I did. And it's a very cautionary, like almost thriller esque kind of thing. 'Cause I know this book's not
Mm-hmm.
really a thriller, but it almost feels like it's like a thriller introduction into what is ostensibly a postmodern abstractism.
I you know I kind of want to get into how what I feel is the genre maybe at some point, but I think because I think that this there you kind of start to see it really in the as you get into the Davidson record, but I guess what's interesting is you kind of mentioned that he's kind of like not necessarily oppositional, but the way he can kind of just go on these kind of tirades, and I think that's kind of that's one way to read it. The way I kind of have I'm reading it, certainly this time around, is it's like to use your metaphor of the watching a movie with a friend. It's like watching a movie with somebody that's seen a movie so many times that they can just talk over it. That they're it exists, but it's not like fully like they're free associating over it. Does that kind of make
Yeah.
sense? It's like there's
Um.
like there's making oh go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but it reminds me of this. Actually, this is something that just jumped in my head. It reminds me of when we used to get together on Fridays and watch movies together. Um. Like back in like the college years, we'd put on a movie, we'd be watching a movie, and then we'd like pause the movie and we'd like talk, and then we'd either talk about the movie or we'd go off on these huge tangents and tirades, and we'd sit there and have the movie paused for anywhere between like 5 minutes and an hour, and then we'd be like, oh yeah, the movie. Then we'd start watching the movie again, and that is actually that might be a little better than like just the whole like friend talking at you while you're watching the movie, because he's interrupting the book, but he's not interrupting the book while it's going. He's interrupting the book, and it's essentially like pausing the book. Yeah, it's like it's kind of like that, to where it's just like you're pausing the movie midway through, and then you're having a conversation, and then you're going back to the movie, and it's not necessarily related to the movie all the time, and you're just like, oh yeah, anyways, and then it gets back to that, which I think is really funny when it happens during the water heater bit, because it's just like the water heater's on the fritz, and then like it just kind of cuts to this whole story, and then it's back. Then like after reading like 2 or 3 pages worth of just some story, I think that's the one that's about. Was that the Pitboxer one?
It might have been, but yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting kind of thing about Johnny is he grows. He's kind of a strange character. He's kind of you could tell he's one of these kind of marginal uh, guys that just lives in like the Los Angeles area. They kind of on the fringes, not necessarily an upstanding citizen, but he's oddly charming. Even in the flashback sequences, he always. I'm not. I would wonder how this is going to last. My impressions of the character over the 700 plus pages that this book lasts, but my initial kind of impressions of him when I'm not kind of looking at him with pity at the beginning here, when seeing him, struggling, like with his, clearly at the bleeding edge of sanity. But he's kind of an oddly charismatic and charming guy, and I think that's something that I mention. I've taken some notes here, to mention as we kind of get through the book. These moments where I think there is more to Johnny Truant than what there you would immediately assume. Like this kind of dissipated party guy in Los Angeles struggling to hold down a job in a tattoo parlor.
Yeah. Which to
Um,
kind of to kind of take everything you just said and throw it into doubt. I feel like I don't think this is a crazy thought. He is a very much an unreliable narrator, because he tells us in like the first major tirade he goes on, the first major aside, it's about him lying. It's like, oh, these Lude was sitting there cutting all of these women's hair in the bar, and then we went into this whole lie about why I have this chip on my tooth, my tooth chipped. I was a pit boxer, and we I was winning every fight, but what I didn't know was that punching bag, my handler, for lack of a better term, was fixing the fights, and now I was supposed to lose. And but like the whole thing, he's just like, oh, that was a lie. And then there was like the other one.
Well, that's interesting because when he's talking about that, he here let me find because that's in the water heater section. Okay.
Yeah, while you're finding that, just to kind of like round off the thought, yeah. So there's that. Then there's him talking about. Oh, to add to my point, he says in there that he's like, oh, isn't it a coincidence that my hot water isn't working now? Well, actually, it isn't because I added heater to Zampano's original text, which said, hey, the original text
That's
was,
what I was looking for.
hey, the water's on the fritz, was the original line, but then Johnny added heater, so now it's hey, the water heater's on the fritz. So to that plus like the lying about the uh lying about the pit boxing to the women to try and get some chicks, get some get laid, and then the story about working with the what was it, the Korean jiu-jitsu in Idaho, and then
Yeah, that little bit.
having to pick up the boiling hot thing with his arms, and that's why he's got the burns on his arms. Like it's like all of those things you put together to where it's like we have this idea of Johnny Truant that he has given us, but like I don't think we're supposed to trust that that's actually who Johnny Truant is, even when he's being upfront and saying this was a lie. This is a story I tell just to try and make myself seem cooler than I am for the women. I feel like that's supposed to also plant seeds of doubt that we're not necessarily supposed to believe what he's saying when he's not claiming to be just making up stories for women. And I
Mhm.
think I think the whole thing to where he's, and once again this is something he admits, but I think this is something intentional with the whole like I added heater to the line to where now it's the water heater is on the fritz instead of the water is on the fritz. Like it's I think we're
Mhm.
supposed to be doubting Johnny Truant as a character so far because he is someone that we cannot trust. And I think we get hints of that in the introduction with the him with the realization that it's very much a kind of a 1 to 100 kind of thing because it's like me and my friend he lived next to this dude, this old man, the old man died, we went and we found this book in his house. It's just leaflets that I kind of put together, and I would read through it every couple of weeks for 20 minutes to an hour, and then it was suddenly, oh, it's been weeks and I've been reading it and I didn't even realize I haven't talked to anybody. And now I'm in this hotel room. I'm covered in blood. It's not all mine. So, we get we start to see kind of in the introduction even that like Johnny Truant is not necessarily someone we should be trusting because it's like
Mhm.
why are you in this hotel? Why do you have someone else's blood on you? What did you do? What have you done? Like why did this happen because of essentially scraps of paper that he found and got invested in, and then when we start reading, we get the lies, the additions, and the kind of larger than life kind of setting he puts himself in. Because even when you just take out the stories that he's telling, the pit boxer and the jujitsu or the karate, whatever it was, you have these things that are bringing up questions that he's not answering. How did your tooth get chipped? How did the burn scars on your arms come about? It has those questions that he's like essentially having us ask without, it's drawing attention to it without directly drawing attention to it. Instead of him being like, look at this scar I've got, ain't this a crazy scar? It's him being like, so I told this story to these people about how I got this scar, but this story isn't true. So now you're just sitting there thinking, well, how did you get it? Like, where did it come from? But he's not telling
Mhm.
us. He's not telling us intentionally, and it's there's a lot of doubt in my head about Johnny Truant as a character, as to who he is and how much we should be believing, even when he is being quote unquote honest with us.
Yeah, I think that's something that's going to be interesting is trying to figure when you're parsing this. I guess this book as a whole is figuring out what is actually happening within the context of the story and what is like a fabrication, an illusion, a distortion, whether that's And I would say it's highly possible that even Zempano is is not fully um, reliable either,
Well,
because this is even within the context of the story. Um, Johnny mentions that he tries to like look some of these things up, these footnotes, these or the Davidson record itself, the film, and he's not able to find it. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. That's another thing too with Zampano specifically is yeah he's sitting there writing all of these things like they're real, and as far as we're aware, so far they're not. Which I actually, if there was something that existed on the internet now, it's been almost 23 years since the book was originally published. So I was wanting to actually like look up and see if somebody actually made, either like an amateur on YouTube or some like indie production company or something like made these things like the it was experimentation number 4. Is that what one of
Expedition.
expedition number 4 and the 5 minute hallway?
Well, that's something that I wanted to talk about when we got there, but it kind of that some of these things they kind of predate they kind of prefigure what you see a lot now on the internet. These kind of this new wave of horror. You know, like in the past they had the things like the creepy pasta, right? This is kind of like I've seen it referred to as analog horror, and you see these things like these fake PSAs. Um, this is the government. Do not go outside and look at the moon. That kind of but it's couched and it's edited in kind of such a way that it looks like a fairly credible like old PSA, and things like the back rooms. That was a fairly popular internet horror. I guess it was a video at first, but I think there was also a video, a game about entering into this kind of unending hallway, like where you go in and it's the inside is not equivalent to the size of the outside. You're just kind of like wandering through these endless hallways, and I think that's kind of I think this book really kind of prefigures that in a very interesting way. That it's very ahead of its time in that
Yeah,
respect.
I think the only thing around that time period that was close to like that is okay. I had to Google it to make sure I'm saying the right thing here. Ted the Caver. Um, though I think Ted the Caver. Yeah, I want to say it was 2000 2001. I'm looking at this is on the first thing that came up was creepypasta.com. Let me try and find something more uh not creepypasta, something that actually references when it originally was released. But it's almost kind of like I don't want to say it's like a creepypasta because creepypasta implies a lot of like amateur horror and a lot of like just kind of bad writing. To be brutally honest, there's a lot like most creepypasta is just bad writing. Um, but in that similar vein, like it is kind of that. It's almost like found footage, but like it's a found book instead of found footage.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference being here is we have somebody who is like telling us, talking to us as we are going through this found footage, for lack of a better term. But yeah, okay, it was 2001 for Ted the Caver. Was when that came out. That it feels similar to something like that. Do you know? Are you aware of Ted the Caver, by the way?
I've heard the name, but for some reason I don't remember. I don't recall what all that was.
It was very early, not early internet. It was 2001. Still kind of early internet.
It's early mass internet, early like mass adoption of the internet.
Yeah. It was this dude named Ted who had this like it's kind of like a blog, kind of like a website. I don't remember exactly, but he was a caver. He'd go into cave. He would explore caves and take pictures, and it was kind of like this blog that he had where he was writing about this cave that he was going into, and it would be like updates every so often. where he would just talk about this cave. Like there was this particular cave that he found that he was really interested in, that he was really wanting to go and explore and map out. And there was like he wanted to be the first to find these runes and all this other stuff. And then like it's all of these weird and creepy things start kind of happening with each of the updates. And he has pictures and he has diagrams. And at one point he like finds this there's like this it's like like a button in the wall that opens up a passageway in the wall that leads to like some new area. And it's a whole thing. It's actually I personally really like it. It's a really fun kind of like thriller kind of story, like kind of horror, because there I think there is a creature at one point. But like it ends with him saying, "Okay." At one point, I think it's him and a friend. They're going in, and then I think the final update is like he's just like, "Okay, I'm going back. I'm going back in tomorrow. I'll come back and I'll give you. I'm gonna go further than I've ever gone. I'll take pictures and all this other shit." And then like that's the final update. So it's a cliffhanger, but it's like it's a it builds up enough to where it's like it's ostensibly like, oh, there's a creature there. It's a dangerous cave as it is. And when he's like, I'm going back in and I'll update you guys when I come back, and then the story ends there, you can get an idea of what actually happened. And it has like a kind of like it's like a bittersweet kind of like unsatisfied, satisfied ending.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
to round it back to House of Leaves, it reminds me of kind of something like that with the 5.5 minute hallway and the exploration number 4. It reminds me of something like Ted the Caver, which is something around that time period, and then leads into the Navidson Project, which I guess Navidson or the Navidson record would be that might be a little more like Blair Witch than anything else to be a little more of
that
its.
that's kind of what I was also going to say. Is it is kind of very of a piece with the kind of nascent. Um, I guess like you're saying, it's kind of like the found. Let's just broadly term it the found genre, like found footage, found
Found media.
website, found media. There we go. This is a kind of a found book. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the intro, it does kind of set us up in a very interesting way. Like we kind of get a kind of a glimpse into the lifestyle that Johnny is living before uh, before the events. You know, as he's like before he becomes engrossed in the book. You know, he's kind of living this party lifestyle. He's hanging out with like these strippers, and you know, he's not really working like he's not like too like a nose to the grindstone kind of guy. He's just kind of guy living on the margins.
Yeah.
You kind of see like the people that he knows, like his friend Lude, which is like the most uh, the the most frequently mentioned, I guess, person in his flashbacks. Is a close friend of his. He just seems to kind of be like this club guy, and his name even is a drug, Quaalude,
Yeah.
and that's actually who introduces him in a manner of speaking to Zampano. Is he's Lude Zampano, the character who is writing uh, the the um, the book that we are reading, the Davidson record. He lives at the same apartment complex that Lude lives at, and he kind of meets it's someone that they're not like super close, but they kind of know each other like from around.
Yeah,
So
he's
it
like
says
that. He's that like the like not necessarily that he's friends with everybody, but everybody knows him because he has like a history, like kind of like almost like a legacy in that apartment complex.
yeah, like he's one of those tenants. Like if I'm sure you've lived at an apartment complex where you know somebody that's like, yeah, I've lived here for 20 years, and it's like, Jesus, and you're like you're saying you know them. They're around. They're a fixture in that, and you kind of talk to them from time to time, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And let's see, but the way we kind of see we Zampano is basically we basically see him, and I think one of the first things we see about him is then the old man died. So he Zampano as a living figure is not really very present in this story. Like we see little snippets of him, like you hear him to like talking to people. You see like he like cats like him. They're saying that at one point they were saying that cats would come up and rub on his legs and stuff, and but he's there, but he's not really in the present in this book as a living character, which is kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah. You reminded me of the cats starting to disappear, and then like they find one like in pieces, right? Like they find it like just like dead.
Do you remember what page that was?
It's in the introduction.
Here we go. On page XV, um, the first peculiar thing Lou told me, leading the way around the short flight of stairs, uh, were the cats. Apparently, in the months preceding the old man's death, the cats had begun to disappear. By the time he died, they were all gone. I saw one with its head ripped off, and another with its guts strewn all over the sidewalk. Mostly, though, they just vanished. But like the Zampanome, I guess to kind of give him like a little bit of a rap here is like he's this very strange guy. He was pretty old. He was according to Lude here at the beginning of chapter or the page XIV is he just Lude says he's 80 years old. No wife, no kids, no nobody at all, not even a friend. So he's kind of this like this loner guy that he's just, and he's also described as blind. He's a blind man. Most of the book, or it says half of the books he owned were in Braille,
Yeah,
and he's kind of like, go ahead.
that's another thing that's interesting is he's described so he's written this book. So what we're reading is Zapano's interpretation, I guess, of all of this stuff. And like he gets into some pretty vivid details here, you know, like the way that Navidson is like the way he looks, like the way he's like the way that his wife like stares at him like wistfully and all this other stuff. This dude's blind.
Yeah, that's something that Johnny actually mentions. I think here in the introduction, even he says that he's kind of the way he interprets it is kind of like he's a kind of a joker. Like he's like these are kind of it's like black humor. Let me see if I can. Okay, he hadn't seen a thing since his mid 50s. That's something that he says on page 2021. Zampano writes constantly about seeing what we see, how we see, and in turn what we can't see over and over again. He returns to the subject of light, space, shape, line, color, focus, tone, contrast, movement, rhythm, perspective, and composition. None of which is surprising considering Zampano's piece centers on a documentary film called The Navidson Record, made by a Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist who must somehow capture the most difficult subject of all, the side of darkness itself. So it's like and then it goes into the part where he's blind as a bat. So it's that's the thing is he's kind of Zampano is he's this blind man that's kind of writing this, I guess, literary, not necessarily literary criticism because it's not this sort of scholarly criticism, I guess is the
It's
best
like
way
a
to put it, of
treatise.
this, yeah, of this of the this supposed documentary.
Yeah, so I guess it lends a little more credence to the idea, the lack of any way to, you know, the fake sources, the untraceable movie. Like it just kind of lends more credence to that we're essentially reading a work of fiction inside of a work of fiction.
Yeah, it's a metafiction of sorts. But I just want to hit this line again, just real quick. where it says, Zampano knew from the get-go that what's real or what isn't real doesn't matter here. The consequences are the same. And I think that's, insofar as you can have a thesis for a novel, I think that just based on, the book's reputation and where we're at in the story I feel like that is a very strong kind of, it's almost Danielewski himself, and I think that's something that I've kind of picked up on is Johnny Truant. He kind of acts almost as seemingly as a mouthpiece
A self
for
insert?
Danielewski himself. Go ahead.
A self insert? Maybe not
Could be.
necessarily. Like we don't know who the author is as a person, but like a self insert as like a like you know like I don't know if it's worth going into that spoiler.
I think there's something to that. I mean, I think there's things that he will say that I think they are things that the author wants you to take away, and I think that's very much one of them. Is like this, that he wants you to take away that this is a very postmodern story in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Would
Like
you?
truth and non-truth are maybe functionally just, there is not really a true. It's a difference, a distinction without a difference, to put it
Yeah.
a certain way.
It does kind of go back to the whole point of that. Like this is not necessarily about the plot that it's telling; it's about how it's telling the plot.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this book is very successful, at least to my point of view, is in like it is very engaging stylistically, and even if we are not able to fully believe the events, even within the world itself, you know, through the use of, we're seeing this through the lens of two unreliable narrators, Sempano and Johnny. They are both unreliable in their own ways, and so we're not necessarily even seeing what we're seeing is like is yeah it's not, it's almost not even third hand, it's like fourth hand, and it's kind of interesting from that perspective. But anyway, I kind of put a little wrapper on Zampano, who is kind of who's the narrator of the Davidson record. Is he's also kind of similar to Johnny in the sense that he seeks out the company of like the opposite sex. He seeks out relationships, not necessarily a romantic nature, but with women. It's kind of an interesting thing. Like these it mentions that he's a he is a blind gentleman, and he has these people come, these readers come, they volunteer, they're UCLA students, and they volunteer and they read to him, but he asks for that young women come to read. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing. It's like that you kind of, it's telling about him as a character. It's like about what he may not be how to put this. He didn't have maybe a family of himself, but he is kind of like, I think he views himself as someone that has a special connection with women. You know.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting close to wrapping up on this on the intro here. Um, One of the things that I caught both in the, like, it's kind of interesting here at that I thought was going to be a lot bigger of a deal is they make I was expecting there to be more references to music, because it says here there's a reference to the Rolling Stones on page XVII. Of course, curiosity killed the cat, and even if satisfaction supposedly brought it back, there's still that little problem with the man on the radio telling me more and more about some useless information. But I didn't care. I just turned the radio off. And then we go into chapter one, and there you have the opening there underneath the where the eye of chapter one is. It's a quote from the Beatles. It's "I saw a film today. Oh boy." Um, so I think that's kind of that's kind of interesting that it's that we have all these musical references. I would like to see um, as we go through the book if that becomes that's like a touch piece or whether that's just kind of a coincidence to see these kind of early um,
And
references.
that would be called an epigraph, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's how you would term the use of the quote there.
Yeah.
It's used as part of the epigraph for the chapter.
What a weird one too. Like it makes sense. Davidson record. I saw a film today. Oh boy. Um, what a weird one though. Just to pull a random line from a day in the life.
Yeah, but I kind of like it. One thing I guess last little bit I want to hit about the introduction is that the word you see from the very first page of the introduction, page XI, is we see the first blue house. So I think that's interesting that even I that started so soon. That's something that kind of caught me by surprise because that's something like I said I did read part of this book before, and I'd forgotten that it's like this motif kind of the it exists there from the very beginning. And that's something I would like to kind of puzzle out, and maybe as we get further into the book, what is the significance? Well, I know what the significance of the word house is. That is the whole the phenomenon within the house is the point of the Davidson record. But what is the point of house being blue? Why is it blue every time we see it? Even as part of a different word within, and often, and even in other languages, house is in that blue color. I would like
Yeah,
to kind of
in German.
figure out. Yes, I'd like to know why blue. You know, is there some sort of significance there? Um, but anyways, I guess we can go ahead and get started about chapter one.
Yeah, it's been an hour.
I,
Are you ready to start chapter one?
see, I think it's interesting that from the very beginning here in chapter one, the first footnote, usually footnote one, is a topic more carefully considered in chapter nine. So,
Yeah.
like from the very beginning, this book has you kind of like there are footnotes, even often within footnotes, so that you can really I don't know you can basically get lost within the footnotes themselves. You know,
Yeah.
it's that's kind of an interesting thing. That's kind of one of the postmodern kind of things that he does here is he kind of uses footnotes to reference things some like scholarly articles or books that may or may not be real. Some of them are. I did do a little research. That's something that I would like to see. I'm sure someone has done it. Is like I would like to see what some of these references are that are real and what are some of these references that are fake, you know, that don't exist. And there's even one that I want to talk about later. What is fake? What is a fake reference that somebody has made um, in the real world to kind of accompany them? That's something that towards the end of our conversation we can kind of get into because there's I think in chapter four I discovered one of those when I tried to run down one of these references. I came across some interesting things there.
Yeah,
Um,
one thing I loved about some of these references that I'm decently confident are fake. I haven't done the research, but it's just an assumption on my part. Is like it'll be like a reference. The footnote will call the reference a part in the chapter where it's like talking about like some specific moment. It's like whether or not I think one of them was about like whether or not Davidson's wife actually loved him. I think one of the things was someone called her like a slut or something. And it's like you get
mhm.
the footnote And like the name of the book is like something that is very specifically tied to what that passage was that the footnote is referencing in the chapter itself. And it's oh god, let me see if I can quickly find an example because I didn't jot anything down. But it's funny because like you get like I'm just gonna make something up because I can't think of the perfect example. But it'd be like, oh, so and so lied about their pizza topping, and then there's like the footnote. The footnote would be referencing a book called "Lying About Pizza Toppings," and it's page 263, and it's like I don't think that a that book exists, and b that you would have a book with that subject matter that's just so perfectly about what you're referencing with the footnote that's this long, and not just like if anything an essay.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of the footnotes, and I think that that's kind of going back to Johnny's characterization of Zampano is like this. Zampano is kind of a funny guy. He's kind of he's like dry. That I think that's an attempt by the character of Zampano to kind of have like a little bit of a dry humor that amuses himself. You know.
Yeah.
But see, I guess let's kind of look here. It says okay, so when Zampano is introducing the Davidson record here, it's pretty clear that with I'm not sure. We'll just take Zampano's framing that for the purposes of this part of the discussion that the Davidson record is real, at least within the context of the book itself. He describes it as something that it's a subject of heated scholarly debate, not just like the in the context, like you were saying, like the context of what is happening, like an analysis. There is debate within the world of the story about whether or not the documentary, the Davidson record, is or is not a hoax. And I think that's kind of interesting. That adds like a third level almost of what is true, what is not true. Is like this whole thing may in fact, and clearly Zampano believes it to be true, certainly with to this point in the story. But it is yet another layer of obfuscation of what isn't true, what is or what is not true.
Yeah, I found an example real quick that I find kind of funny. Yeah, so in retrospect, this is on page 16 and 17. In retrospective, the rabid speculation over Karen's infidelities seems driven by a principality, driven by a principally. I can't read today. Oh my god, I can't talk today. Rather, seems driven by a principally sexist culture, especially since so little attention was paid to Davidson's role in their relationship, as David Liddell once exclaimed, quote, "If he has horns, who's to say he doesn't have hooves?" And the footnote is a horny duo by David Liddell. Page
Yes, that was very.
78.
I found that quite amusing myself.
I just googled it. There is no such thing as a horny duo by David Liddell.
But is there something called an Utney reader?
I just closed my book. Can you spell that for me real quick?
UTNE reader.
UTNE.
Yeah, UTNE.
Uh, the it would be Utney or Utney.
I don't know.
It is a real thing. First issue date 1984. It is a digital digest that collects and reprints articles on politics, culture, and the environment, generally from alternative media sources including journals, newsletters, weeklies, zines, music, and DVDs.
I think it's interesting too that you see here from the beginning. All right, so there's this kind of debate on whether or not the Davidson record is like a well-made hoax or whether it is true within the context of the story. Um,
Oh, this is all within
And I
the
think this,
context of the story?
yes, because here it's talking about while enthusiasts and detractors will continue to empty entire dictionaries trying to describe or deride it, authenticity still remains the most likely word to stir a debate. It's this idea that within the world of the story, we'll call it Zampano's story, not necessarily the outer story of Johnny looking at the book itself. As it's within the world of the story, the Zampano story. There's controversy over the whether or not the events of the book are real or not real, and I think it's kind of interesting that it's like this. Unfortunately, out of those who accept its validity, many tend to swear allegiance to tabloid UFO sightings. Um, Clearly, it is not easy to appear credible when, after vouching for the film's verity, the discourse suddenly switches to why Elvis is still alive and probably wintering in the Florida Keys. Yes, it is. We are seeing something within the context of his story. We are seeing something that is filmed, but there's yet still this sort of like disbelief about it, and it's kind of it's interesting, and it kind of calls to mind this idea that's only more relevant now, is this idea of like with the advent of like the digital world, and like how images can be manipulated using computers and you know photography. It's like it creates it's like it feeds back into this further theme of what is reality, what can we truly know, what can we really trust, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yes, it kind of I don't know. He describes the Davidson record further as wait, hold on. The Davidson record as it exists in their world, I guess didn't really pop up fully formed. It was preceded by the release of the 5.5 minute hallway, um, which which was I'm trying to wonder. Do you happen to know, or do you remember where that sort of the initial dissemination of that happened? Like how people started to discover it.
Um,
This
it was like VHS tapes that were going around.
That's right. And I think there was something particularly striking about the idea of the VHS tape, because subsequent dubbings, you're getting copies of copies. There's like this loss of visual fidelity, and that's kind of that's another kind of piece of this
Which I think that is actually
this
brought up with the copies on copies.
yeah, that's what I mean. Is like it kind of it feeds into this idea about the about reality, and how in the retelling and recounting of these things they become distorted further.
Yeah, it's like a game of telephone.
See, oh, there's on page 4. This is we're still very early on in chapter 1. We kind of get Johnny's first we see the time we see for the first time him interacting with Sampano via his footnotes, because a lot of these footnotes are the footnotes of Zampano himself, but some of these footnotes, as you kind of mentioned before, are Johnny kind of having a discourse either with you, the reader, or with the text itself. And here he's translating, he's helpfully translating this Italian phrase that I will not attempt to replicate here, but he's finding, he's like, this is from Milton's Paradise Lost, and it's the famous line, "Before me nothing was created but eternal, um, but things and but before me nothing was created but eternal things, and I endure eternally. Abandon hope, or abandon every hope, ye that enter." And this is also kind of interesting, because we also see underneath that, we see the editors. They are a lot less frequent that we see in the story. Usually, when it's somebody talking to us, it is either Zempano or Johnny. But occasionally the editors will come in, and they are always follow um, their input with dash the editors.
Yeah, they sign
So it's
off.
go ahead.
They have a sign off.
Yes, they kind of sign all of their contributions, but they also, and this is something that we didn't mention earlier, but I'm sure most people that if they're they're interested in the story, they're aware that Johnny's contributions they are in a different font, whereas I think the most of the book is probably Times New Roman. If I had to guess, I'm not a font
Yeah,
expert.
they say
Johnny's
that with the on page 4 of the editors. He's in Courier and everything else is in Times.
yes, okay, that's right. Let's see. So we get. I guess let's. Do you kind of want to recount what's the I guess before I let you do a little more plot recounting, now that I think about it, is that this line, there's this passage here that was pretty striking. It's many even today many people still feel the Davidson record, in spite of all those existential refinements and contemporary illusions, continues to reflect those exact statements. In fact, a few eager intellectuals have already begun to treat the film as a warning in and of itself, perfectly suited to hanging above the gates of such schools as architectonics, Popomo, consequentialism, neoplasticism, phenomenology, information theory, Marxism, biosemiotics, to say nothing of psychology, medicine, New Age spirituality, art, and even neo minimalism. Um, so, so I did a little bit of little research because some of those things I'm familiar with, and some of those things I'm not. I kind of think one of the ones that I was not familiar with that I would like to do a little more research in is architectonics,
Yeah,
the
that's a
science
weird
of
one.
architecture. Go ahead.
That's a weird one.
That is very weird, but I think it is very fitting within the context. And I'm just going to can we just comfortably say that this is a going to be a pretty spoilerific in our discussion.
Oh yeah, that's the whole
Um,
point.
okay, I just want to say that that the architectonics is interesting because the context of the story taking place within a house that is shifting, expanding, and contracting, being larger on the inside than it appears on the outside. That kind of thing. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to be there. Um, Another thing, the next school that they mentioned, and I don't think this is necessarily like a well, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I was not able to really nail down what this is a school of. Was it of maybe literature or of art, like some sort of art movement? But it's Popomo. What I got from that was like this is it's like disc is those. It seems to be related to works that are discursive of this idea of meaninglessness, which I think ties in nicely with the sort of like um, the sort of theses that we've kind of mentioned within the book itself up to this point. Um, and then the next school it mentions here is consequentialism, and this kind of is shifting. The first, I guess it's yet another kind of discipline here that we're looking at. Consequentialism being that the moral philosophy where the ends justify the means, that sort of thing. So it becomes like another discipline of philosophy, neoplasticism, and this is something that I actually spoke to our good friend Nikolai about that I would love to have on have on for our discussion about if we do some other books later. We could talk about that at another point. But he was he was very helpful where he talked about neoplasticism. It's a it was an art movement that kind of tied in with Do you know the White Stripes album Distill, right? Can you kind of picture that album in your mind?
Like how the album flows, or like the album cover?
The album cover.
No, not off the top of my head. Let me look it up real quick.
Okay, yeah. You go ahead and look that up. But it was like an art movement.
Okay, yeah, that one.
That Yeah, and you've seen paintings that look like that, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're so it's kind of tied into like it was a lot of it like a Dutch art movement like Distill, and you get artists like Mondrian and that sort of thing. And they're kind of their whole thing was creating this new style of abstraction that was at the same time very concrete. It's you have a lot of like simple colors, like the primary colors in black and white, with the use of a lot of like geometric shapes and grids. Um, but it has these very concrete, distinct building blocks of like artistic, visual artistic expression, but arrayed in such a way that it was very abstract in and of itself. Um, and that's kind of what I got from this. So that I would like to see how like these how that ties into the later events of the plot. Like so just these ideas of like these elemental features like arranged in a way that is abstract or like difficult to ascertain a direct meaning from. Let's see, what were the other schools? Phenomenology, the study of consciousness and experience. Um, Information theory, the scientific study of communication, the scientific study of the quantification, storage, and communication of information. Marxism, which is the socioeconomic analysis that is a materialist interpretation of historical development and the dialectical relationships of class and social conflict. Um, that's something that I think is kind of interesting. I'm kind of curious about how that later kind of comes into play, or if that's just kind of a like an academic non sequitur, because Marxism it is rooted in this sort of materiality, and this is a very metaphysical uh, story, at least to this point. It's very abstract, very metaphysical. I'm going to wrap up here in a second. Now, biosemiotics, which is the idea that life is based on semiosis, um, which is signs and codes. Um, I guess which is kind of I think probably was gaining prominence at this time because this was around the era of like cloning and like a lot of things related to and like the advent of like DNA within the context of like resolving crimes and that kind of thing. So it's like this idea of like signs and codes based in biological science and codes having some sort of I guess valence on the world around it. And let's see, last little bit here. Um, I thought those were actually, that's it for me. Those were the ones that I found meaningful enough to kind of like do a little digging, read about a little bit just to see if I could kind of picture how they might come into play as the story gets going. Um, but if I guess if you want, you could we if you we could talk about the 5.5 minute hallway if you want, or we could just I guess where would you like what would you like to talk about it as because I feel like I've talked a lot over the past 30 or so minutes.
No, it's all good. I definitely trust you to talk more about things like that than me. So the 5.5 minute hallway and expedition number
Mm-hmm.
4, in terms of the timeline of the Davidson record, that's like further than where we're at, right? By the end of chapter 4.
Yes, I would say so because at the to I want to bring us back here, but I just want to just to describe what happens at the end of chapter four. At the end through chapter four, they're kind of looking like, wow, this is half an inch or quarter of an inch larger inside than it is outside. What's the deal with that? Um, that kind of ends with that being resolved, and like, okay, never mind, we figured it out. Here we got all the measurements there lining up, and then um, like the character of Tom, Navidson's brother. We should probably talk about Navidson here in a second. Um, he knocks over a book, and they discover like a whole foot of space has opened up behind a bookcase.
Yeah.
So, that's something that's So I think
What a
that and the characters react strongly to that. So I would think that this 5 minute hallway that they're not reacting as strongly to in context is it happens after the point where they've become maybe not desensitized totally, but they are more aware of what's going on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's just such a great little piece of like subtle storytelling with the because you have like that one kind of just it's basically just an offhand comment. It's not. I don't know if I want to say subtle because if you're actually just paying attention to what you're reading, you're gonna figure out why it is the way it is. But she has the bit where like the she grabs a book from the bookshelf and all of them domino over, and the friend that's over there, she's like, oh wow, that's convenient, and she's like, yup, oh that's you don't need a book stopper when you got walls. And then at the end of the chapter, like the dude hits the books and they domino and then they fall over, and then it's like that's how it's a way of telling you it I feel like it's really tough in a book to do show don't tell, but that was like a really great
Mhm.
way of doing that because it's like now when the bookshelf was brought up earlier, almost as kind of like an aside, it's like oh yeah, that's why we got walls instead of book stoppers, ha 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 ha. And then you have like
Mhm.
the end of the chapter where it's like the wall didn't stop the book, and now it's like oh shit, and then you have it ends with her
Exactly.
screaming. It's a great it's a great way of doing a show don't tell in a book where you can't really show. That's just really cool. That was a really cool way to like make use of that. I thought.
I very much agree with that. I thought that was though, and it's a very it, I guess I can go ahead and just say this now because we're talking about the 5.5 minute hallway and that kind of thing. I think I would describe this book and the what we because the Davidson record is this recounting of this very strange and unsettling house that is you know that does not seem to, like the laws of physics and of science, they don't really seem to apply here, and that seems to be to this point the main source of for lack of a better word, creepiness, because I think this book can be fairly described, at least as somewhat of a horror novel. Not like maybe strictly speaking, but there is like a lot of like things that are meant to be unsettling. And I don't mean this within the context of the story. I mean like the author Danielewski is telling you these things, and the idea is that it will unsettle you. Um, I think this is a I don't know if this is a term or whether I'm just making this up, but it doesn't strike me as a specific kind of horror as is often understood. It's almost like it's a different genre unto itself. It's like this. There's not like to this point like a scary creature, or there's although they do reference like feeling like they're being watched or something like that. But there's not like there's not anything that's specific. It's like a phenomenological. That's probably not a word, but like the phenomenon, the strange phenomenon is the source of the horror, not like an antagonist, strictly speaking. You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this 5.5 minute hallway, like I kind of mentioned earlier, is sort of a forerunner to contemporary like horror things, which are similar in their sort of phenomenological horror is like things like the back rooms. Like it's kind of. I think that this when he's talking about the 5.5 minute hallway here, it's kind of it's interesting because it kind of gives us our first look into um, what this what is this. I don't know. I struggle with the right word here, but like the negative. Well, I'll just call it the negative space. It's probably not the right term, but it's by that I'm referring to like this space that by all means should not exist. And we see things like here, it's oh, and there's the first mention of both Tom. I think Karen, Tom, Navidson, and Billy Reston. I think those are all, for the most part, those are the main characters within the context of the Navidson record.
Yeah.
But
That we know of so far.
yeah, that we know of so far. I mean, they're also the children. The children. I mean, we'll see, but there's some there's sometimes, and I don't know that this is probably the best literary analysis, but I choose to look. There are some characters that are not necessarily
Noteworthy?
they're. I guess they are noteworthy in the sense that we're supposed to like they matter to Will Davidson, um, but like the children, they don't really exist as fully fledged characters, at least at this point that I've read in the book. But they exist more as ideas,
Yeah.
like they're like the idea of children,
They're kind of
and
set
that's something
dressing.
that exactly they kind of exist to bring the impression of something because you the reader make the connection of there is a child in this very strange, surreal, dangerous, creepy space.
Yeah.
They exist to create within the reader a feeling rather than to either deliver specific plot. And again, this is only through the first 4 chapters here that I'm speaking. They don't necessarily bring a lot to the plot or to like the philosophical space of the book, but there's a lot of um, yeah, they just exist to kind of create a sense with they are a plot device almost rather than a functioning character.
Yeah.
But yeah, they talk about this negative space and they refer to it where Navidson says it's freezing in there. So that's kind of an interesting thing. That's something that I'm always like scanning for when I'm reading here. I want to know like what is this weird shadow realm negative space non-Euclidean. I don't know. We need to find a good term for it, but like what is that like? And I think that's kind of an interesting thing that we kind of like. It's good to like set to kind of orient yourself in what is this like? What is this place like? Because I kind of picture it as like looking essentially like a normal house, but if you're in it, it's like darker. Like theoretically, like you can see maybe a light is on, but it's the room itself is like the place is not as bright. He says he describes it as being cold. There's just like a general sense of wrongness.
Yeah. I imagine we're gonna get more of that as we go. As it
Mm-hmm.
stands, it's we're still in the introductory phase of things. The weirdest
Exactly.
thing so far outside of the teaser, as they called it, of the 5 minute hallway and the exploration number 4 is the anomaly of the outside versus inside distance, the space.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we've it's almost honestly it's almost perfect where we stop because it feels like we're on the cusp of we're on like the tipping point of when like things are gonna start to go from like that's kind of weird to oh that's fucked like real fast.
Yes, I feel like that is the case.
I feel like that's where we're at right now. So I am
Yeah,
looking forward to diving into this more because I feel like it necessarily hasn't been fully expressed, but like I'm really enjoying this book in all facets of it. The Davidson record is super interesting, and it's almost kind of like to use a gaming metaphor for you that I know you will understand. It's almost kind of like when you're playing Yakuza Zero, where
mhm.
and by you I mean you specifically, Daniel. Um, uh, where it's like you're playing through it as Kiryu, and you're like, this is great, I love this, and then it swaps over to Majima, and you're just like, oh, but I was so into Kiryu. Then you're playing as Majima, and you're like, oh, this is great. Then it swaps back over to Kiryu, and you're like, oh, but I was really enjoying Majima. It's like that. I feel like with Johnny and with Navidson, where it's like you have these.
I,
Sorry.
I was no, I was just about to voice my agreement. Please continue.
Yeah. It's like that with it's like that with Johnny and Navidson because
Mhm,
you get like this you get these nice asides, these tangents that Johnny goes into that, like we said earlier, they have nothing to do with anything really. It's the oh, I'm telling a story about I was a pit boxer making money and shit, and it's got nothing to do with water heaters at all. He comes into the whole thing because he's like, I had to take a cold shower in my hotel room or whatever it was, and then it just reminds him of
mhm.
that, and he goes into that. And then we have the having the breakdown in the tattoo shop, and it has not really much to do with much else. But then we go into that, and then his like escapades with Lude, and it's like I know it's a bit of a one other thing that I was aware of going into this book was how divisive the Johnny Truant story could be. I didn't really know specifically. I just know a lot of people were like, I don't like this thing that happens in the book a lot. I know that's a kind of divisive part of the book. I love it. I think it's great. It's a story within a story, and I find him interesting. But like I said earlier, I don't trust anything he's saying. But it's weird. It's a weird kind of dichotomy that's going on right now, where it's like you got this really interesting slow burn, like thriller horror esque kind of story building with the Davidson record, where you know that the shoe's about to drop, or the hat that the other shoe's gonna drop, the hat's gonna drop, whatever you want to say. You have it to where you know it's coming, and you're getting this great build up to a story where you know that like shit's about to go bad, and it's gonna go bad in such a strange way, and we don't know necessarily what the consequences are gonna be, but we know that things are gonna go wrong, and we get a nice build up to that, and then it's almost like a cutting your legs out from under you kind of moment where you just get Johnny coming in. And he's just like, oh yeah, so that I was fighting dudes in a ring, and then there were exotic birds on this boat, and well, I didn't get $5,000, but boy, did my captain did. And he was like, oh well, you know what, you owed me anyways. And you get that, and then you're just like, what? And then you go back to the Davidson record, and it's just more and more of a slow burn, more and more of a build, and build and build and build and build. Then it's like, oh yeah, you want to know how I got these scars? By the way, yeah, I'm talking to this chick named Allison, and we went and had a we. Oh, this is I'm gonna wrap back around to this in a second. But we had this weird threesome, and then we all this other stuff. Then it's just back to Davidson. It's so jarring at times, but it's like it's intentional, and it's so weird and it's so perfect, and I kind of love it. Um,
Yeah, it reminds me of I don't know if you remember this, but like we would occasionally try to find weird music combinations. And one thing that we found like weirdly fitting sometimes was like these playlists of like or playing like these songs very disparate together or like after one another. Like I remember one time we found like this sequence of like this. I'd have to look and find it again, but like this Frank Sinatra song and this Green Day song. These very that they were clearly kind of clashing in terms of stylistically, but there's something about that when you see them together against each other that was kind of like it was kind of compelling, you know.
yeah. But to kind of loop back a little bit to Johnny, and specifically the threesome that he has with her name's Allison, right? Amber is her name. I'm sorry.
Amber, yes.
Yeah. Um, Johnny is a poet, to put it one way. This was one of the most tasteful sex scenes I think I have ever read in a book, because like it's a run-on sentence. It's a hell of a run-on sentence. Like, holy hell, it is a run-on sentence. Like, you get so much going on just in the span of one sentence that is like 20 lines and like maybe 250 plus words. Uh It starts so abrasive too. We just sat down on the floor and snorted lines of coke off of CD cases. Like, it starts off just so like abrasive and just like, oh yeah, we had drugs and sex. But then you get into like the weird kind of details of it. I'm not trying to make the whole thing out of sex right now, but it's not so much about the acts that are happening, but the prose that he's using. That is what I found so fascinating about it.
I think
Um,
that's a very good observation. I think Johnny is a very naturally charismatic person, and he's a natural storyteller. Like that's what I was kind of saying earlier. Like there's more to Johnny than meets the eye. Like you think of him as like this guy. He's struggling to hold down a job in a tattoo parlor. He's a party guy. You know, but there's an intelligence to the character of Johnny. Like he's very like street. He's an of the streets, to use a term, kind of guy. But like you can tell that there's a lot. There's more to him than meets the eye. He's a pretty smart guy. You know.
yeah,
Like he's like very engaging in the way that his in the context of the story, he is writing these things down, and so but it's very readable. You know, it's very interesting stuff that he's writing.
yeah. And then like he has that aside where he starts reminiscing about like times with his father. Like he remembers his father, and this is like what this is once again. If you kind of lose yourself in the text, this is in the middle of a sex scene, and it's very
Exactly.
strange. It's very strange almost because it's like you're having sex and you're thinking about your father. Without the context, it sounds real strange, really weird, and like very creepy. But then it's like the way he does it though, it almost feels sensual, and you're like, what? What is happening right now? It's so strange. I don't know. It's that scene really stuck out to me, and it's like I said, it's like one of the most tasteful sex scenes I've ever read because it's not about the sex. It's about everything else, and it's just so strange. And I'm like, man, this
I,
dude just like to kind of like go into a more just like broad, just taking myself completely out of a sense. Mark Z. Danielewski is a really talented author because he's able to do this to make this like really beautiful passage that almost feels ethereal and like almost like an outer body thing, and it's just very it's a run-on sentence, which is it's very Hemingway, right? Was it
well,
Hem- was it Hemingway that was known for
I,
his run-on sentences?
I think to a certain extent, I don't know. I might need to refresh my knowledge of Hemingway because I think a lot of some of the Hemingway things was like the very short, punchy, to the point, like sentences, like crisply punctuated, kind of like very direct, not necessarily like dumbed down, but like simple sentences, and like clear um, dialogue, or not necessarily dialogue, but like word choice. But I don't know. Could be. Maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, Hemingway. I just looked up just to double check myself. Yeah, Hemingway. He did have a history of using like maybe not necessarily frequently, but he did use run-on sentences a lot for things. And it's not necessarily. I don't want to say it's Hemingway-esque to where it's like this reads just like Ernest Hemingway. Like that's not what I mean. It's just more so it's something I'm aware of Hemingway with him using run-on sentences to almost like kind of drive in a point and make it kind of like not necessarily supersede what the point you're trying to get across, but it almost kind of like adds impact or punch to it. Like that's what I mean
Mm-hmm.
when I say it's like Hemingway, where he's using that run-on sentence to do a similar thing that Hemingway did with his run-on sentences. Long way of saying that it reminded me of that. But it was just that scene stuck out to me, and it's one of those things where it's like I've read a lot of Martin, and I've read a lot of sex scenes because I've read Martin,
Mm-hmm.
and I am of the opinion that sex scenes are very awkward and it is really hard to kind of like get something going in your book to where this is just my opinion. It's I,
Mhm.
it's awkward, man. It's just it's very strange, and you're just it kind of takes me out a bit because it's like a lot of it is very like distasteful, for lack of a better term. It's very raunchy, very like erotic, and it's like it's smutty, for like I'm not trying to sound puritanical here, but like there's a very famous example from A Dance with Dragons. I think it's A Dance with Dragons. It might be A Feast for Crows. I don't know. I get a lot of those two mixed up because they take place at the same time. There's a sex scene that I know is pretty infamous in one of those books from Martin. That is really really graphic with its word choice, and it's just awkward and uncomfortable. And it's like you've had sex scenes that are like a little more tasteful in the previous books in the series, and it's fine and
Mhm.
it's whatever. It's just all right. These characters are having sex, cool, whatever. But then there's also that one in particular that's really just too far. So for me in particular, sex in novels is a very kind of like it's a very precarious thing to write where you can either lean way too heavily into it, where you've got essentially not essentially 50 shades of gray, but it invokes a similar emotion to where you're reading it and you're just like, this is just distasteful, this is smutty, this is uncomfortable, I wish I wasn't reading these characters fucking right now. And then you have other ones where it's just like, oh, that was really well done, like cool. And I feel like this is more on that side of that spectrum, to where it's like it was a sex scene. I'm spending a lot of time on a sex scene, I realize, but I really want to really staple the fact that I'm talking about his use of prose and how he wrote the scene in particular, not because of what the scene is about. I really want to stress that. It was just really cool. It was nice to look at that and me understand that these characters are indeed having sex, but it is done in such a tasteful way that where I'm like, I'm impressed that you were able to do this without making me feel uncomfortable and wonder why I'm reading about people having sex right now. So I just wanted to point that out. It was a cool scene. Anyways, yeah.
But yes, I agree. I think Danielewski is a very talented writer in that respect. That it creates, he's able to use these difficult or sensitive topics, but he's able to handle them with a certain degree of, I guess, delicacy. That
Yeah.
he's able to, it's able to and take every, as far as it goes, like there's a lot of like you could say like there's like a lot of tension, that you see in between like uh Davidson and his wife Karen, and I think in the hands of a less careful writer, you could create this character of Karen that is not, well, true to her name, like the idea of the Karen, but like
Yeah.
he creates he has a very deft touch with these characters, and I think that's something that's very much to his credit. And I think there's something also interesting about how strong of a voice that he gives each character. There's a lot of characters, or a lot of writers, um, both within the world of the novel and within like films, for example, that there's not really a very distinct, uh, like a lot of characters will sound alike, and it can be very, and in the case of like a novel, it can be kind of difficult without the if something is not very well punctuated or like very well well edited grammatically, it can be like, okay, wait, so who's talking right now? Um,
Yeah.
I, Danielewski is very good about each character. You get a sense very quickly, I might add, about how each character has, how each character talks, how they think, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Which I'm glad you brought that up because that was something also I was trying to get to, but I just kind of got too hung up on the sex of it, unintentionally. But to make it more about sex, this is a credit to Danielewski, with him, like you said, giving voice. You went exactly where I wanted you to go, so thank you for that. Or you went exactly where I wanted to go. So it makes a nice segue that I've ruined. He does a really great job of so it's like, you know, we've said earlier, it's like a story within a story. We have Johnny Truant's story, and we have Zappano's story telling the House of Leaves, the Navidson record inside of that. So we have essentially two authors speaking to us in this one book with Johnny Truant and Zappano. And so we have their two writing styles that are clashing with each other, and all of this is in one book written by one person, by Danielewski. And it's so well done that you feel like it's these it this isn't anything that's like, super wondrous for talented authors. Like any author worth his snuff does this in any book, but I think it's more so the format in which this book is presented that really kind of like accentuates it, as opposed to it just being a book, like, to go back to the example I've been using a lot here with Martin, with the Ice and Fire series, where it's just viewpoint characters. Each chapter is being essentially narrated, not narrated. It's a viewpoint. It's following a different character, so that character has their own voice, their own perspectives and shit, and like that's what like the viewpoint does with like Martin and Ice and Fire, as opposed to with this, where it's like you get that same thing where it's like viewpoints, where it's Truant and Zappano, but it's done side by side in a clashing manner, like to go back to the whole like it's a distractor kind of thing, and like to go back to the passages, comparing. I'm gonna compare the two sex scenes here. The one with Johnny Truant and Amber and her friend, and the one between Davidson and his wife. And you get it's two different authors, quote unquote, telling similar actions in two different ways, and they're both very well done. I thought, because with in the Davidson record with Sopranos, it's they had time, and they had time for themselves, and there was a lot of opening and closing of their hands, and like that was like the extent of it. And it's like you get that dichotomy of writing style. This is just a nice example because it's in my mind right now, and it's a nice kind of like in your face kind of thing. It's a way that you can see the different styles of writing between Zappano and Truant, where you get a very flowery kind of like wordy, very run on, but still sweet kind of moment from Johnny with his writing on it, and then you get Zappano's, which is a very just kind of matter of fact kind of, this is what happened, but I'm not going to explicitly say it. I'm going to use um not a metaphor, but like I'm going to use a descriptor that symbolizes this without explicitly stating it. And it's my point being is that, and I think I've already said it, is that it's a nice kind of way that you show the difference between these two authors' writing style, but it's all being done in one book by one author, and it's really cool. I like it. This is a very well written book, is my point, and I appreciate that. I think I got my point across. I hope I did. The prose
Uh,
in this is very good.
yes, I just realized that I had muted myself at that point. But yes, I definitely agree. Um, let's see, we've been going for quite a while, and we are still only partway through chapter one.
I feel like we've jumped around. We've jumped around across all four chapters that we've read, plus the introduction. Um, I mean, I don't think we necessarily need to do like a beat by beat plot summary, because for one, there's not really a plot so far. It's just kind of like an abstraction of ideas that have started to coalesce into an idea. But
That's true. It is kind of like a thing about it. It's the plot moves in such a way, and that, like it doesn't move like it's well paced. Like I'm never feeling like bored, but or like okay, when is this wrapping up? But like it's very well paced, but there's not a lot that has really been happening. Excuse me. Like there's not a lot that's been like a lot has been made of like this idea of this guy, measuring a room over and over again, and finding like a quarter inch difference. Like structurally, like if you think about it, that would be very boring that's very boring to imagine in the abstract, right? It's like this guy getting out a measuring tape, spooling it out, being like, like, and even the idea of there being a quarter inch difference doesn't even necessarily excite the mind very much. It's like you could be like, well, I mean, maybe he's doing something wrong. Maybe he's not taking this or that into account. But at the same time, and this is a credit to Danielewski, is that you have a very strong, you were very invested this whole entire time, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I guess do you wanna get like kind of to a wrap up of House of Leaves so far for us all the, you were worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about, and here we are 2 hours deep, and we've only read ostensibly 50 pages of the book so far.
uh, I guess before we wrap up, I do want to talk a little bit about Exploration 4, which was the other, um, I guess, teaser, so to say, that came out in the world of Zampano's narrative. Um,
Yes, that was very much like a
after
found footage thing.
Yes, and it was actually it's interesting because it's kind of a hook, because like we were to kind of contrast with what I was just saying, is like where it feels like there's not a lot happening, and things are very kind of quiet and low stakes. It's kind of it's pretty eerie, um, like because the way we see it is there's a lot of, like, especially when you imagine it in the context of like not just as just words on the page, but if you kind of picture the film itself, the short film itself, is like this very choppy, poorly edited thing where there's like a lot of strange images. It's like this you see Navidson. It's that the first shot catches Navidson mid phrase. He is tired, depressed, and pale. And then it kind of breaks in. Days, I think, and I don't know. Then he drinks something. And then he's just kind of like laughing to himself. He's like, I think I'd like to burn it down, but I can't think clearly enough to do it. And now this. And so it's like this you can picture this very clearly in your mind. Like Davidson, he's just like this guy who's just at his wits end. He's kind of losing it. He's proposing these things, like he wants to burn down his house. He's joking about burning down his house. He's a guy who's being pushed to his limits. And then we also see further on, it's like these just muddle of shots about Karen and Tom. They can't. There is as the next shot jumps to Karen and Tom arguing about whether or not to go in after him. And at this point, it remains unclear to whom they are referring. So it's clear that there's something has gone terribly wrong. There are several more shots. Trees in winter, blood on the kitchen floor, one shot of a child, Daisy, crying. So it's like it's in a very short span of time. Like it gives you a very negative, like this, like not negative, like it becomes very uncomfortable very quickly. Like you can imagine viewing this tape, and it's like it's very unsettling. And then it's like um followed by three more shots: dark hallways, windowless rooms, stairs. Then a new voice: I'm lost, out of food, low on water, no sense of direction. Oh God, and it's like this. Excuse me, but it's like what's interesting here is, like, I think this is our first, maybe outside of the 5 minute hallway, which is kind of like an interesting kind of thing, but not particularly um, unsettling. It does a great job of establishing the the uh, the phantom zone negative space as this very oppressive thing, this very creepy thing. And one thing that's interesting here, that it's that I want to see if it circles back of whether it's just the character, this unnamed character, um, freaking out. He says, let's see, there's something here. It's following me. No, it's stalking me. I've been stalked by it for days, but for some reason, it's not attacking. So that's kind of an interesting thing to. I kind of want to mention that is like is I think there's to your point that I think the other shoe when it drops it's really going to drop. And this is neither here nor there, but I just flipped to the next page just to kind of look, and there's a quotes from an interview, a fake interview with Harvey Weinstein, which
Yeah,
is a very unfortunate reference.
yeah, it has
Um,
not aged the best. Yeah, I think we've covered a good amount for now for at least this first one here. So, uh, next week, next weekend, next Saturday, come back talk about it some more.
yes, I'm very excited, and you know I think that was a very successful first session of the Sad Boy Book Club.
Yeah, I look forward to finishing House of Leaves and exploring other avenues, other books.
Definitely, I think if we can get this going for on a long enough time period, I think there's some that there's definitely a lot of books that I would like to. I've been meaning to read for a long time, and it would be good to just have something to like this that kind of I think because I think the being able to discuss these books and these things it kind of deepens the enjoyment, at least for me. So
Yeah,
I look forward to doing this in the future.
yeah, and it puts a bit of a goal on it too to kind of keep at least for me keep reading a little more consistent because I've been trying to get back into reading for 2 years now and I've finished 3 books in that time. So I'd like to get a little more consistent with my reading, get back to it because it's a hobby that I absolutely love that I've just been neglecting for the better part of a decade now. And I think this is a great way to do it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
So yeah, see you next week then. We'll talk more about House of Leaves, maybe other things too. Maybe not as many tangents about other books, but still, that's part of the fun, isn't it?
It really is. It's the connection. It's that's kind of the magic of literature and of pop culture. Just the weaving the tapestry, as it were. But
Yeah,
yeah, it was great.
it was. I look forward to doing this more.
Sounds good. Talk to you later.